Instead of science, promoters use dummy reviews by hand-picked panels of pro-fluoridation experts. And now I want to read you a very interesting quote. It's from the book, The Fluoride Wars. And I quote from this book because this book is otherwise fairly pro-fluoridation. They certainly take the status quo at face value. This is what they say about these reviews that these promoters rely on so much. Endorsements and reviews, right? Not the primary literature. You very seldom hear a promoter refer to a primary study in the literature. Okay. Anti-fluoride forces have always claimed that the many government-sponsored review panels set up over the years to assess the cost and benefits of fluoridation were stacked in favor of fluoridation. A review of the membership of the various panels confirms this charge. The expert committees that put together reports by the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences in 1941, 1944, and 1954, the National Academy of Sciences, 1951, 1971, 1977, and 1993, the World Health Organization in 1958 and 1970, the US Public Health Services in 1991, are rife with the names of well-known medical and dental researchers who actively campaigned on behalf of fluoridation or whose research was held in high regard in the pro-fluoridation movement. Membership was interlocking and incestuous. And that is from people that are pro-fluoridation. Thank you, Fries and Leah. Next. Recent bias reviews. The CDC in 1999, Fluoridation Forum in Ireland. I testified before that forum. That was a travesty. The IMRC in Australia 2007, and Health Canada in 2011. And because you might think that these charges may be over the top, that you're hearing from somebody who's passionate about this issue, let me give you chapter and verse here because it's important. Next, a recent example. A panel, this is a panel of 6 experts picked by Health Canada to review the literature. Next. 6 experts. Next. 4 of these 6 experts to review the literature were dentists and pro-fluoridation dentists, well-known pro-fluoridation. There they are, J. Kumar, Chris Clark, Stephen Levy, and Michael Levy. So you're going to review the literature on harm and effectiveness, and you're going to use 4 pro-fluoridation experts out of 6 to do it. Next. The 6 experts, after reviewing the literature on fluoride and IQ, declared that the weight of evidence indicated that there was no problem. Question: what weight of evidence indicates that there's no problem with IQ and fluoride? I'll go through the evidence in a moment. Next. Health Canada. When they came out with their report based upon these 6 experts, they had only reviewed 5 of the 23 IQ studies that were available at that time. And I provided them with references to the other 18. Next. And when the final report came out, they didn't change a word of their review, and they still had only reviewed 5 of the studies. So you're going to have to be able to count up to 18 to know that we're not dealing with a straight deck here. They asked for public input, and when they were given public input, they completely ignored it. Next. Why? 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 Well, this is what I think. Next. Health agencies in fluoridated countries seem more interested in protecting this practice than protecting the health of their citizens. It's sad to say that, but sometimes people find it very difficult to escape a paradigm. They find it very difficult to admit that they're wrong. Maybe they're frightened of losing credibility and losing the public's trust. But I assure them, the longer they keep this going, the more of the public's trust they're going to lose. Next. Let's look at the real science. One of the few examples of a review that was balanced was the National Research Council review of 2006. I testified for 45 minutes before this panel. Here's the thing that came out. Fluoride in Drinking Water Scientific Review of EPA Standards. Next. This review took 3.5 years, was 507 pages long, 1,100 references. By the way, it was a balanced panel. So the best I can determine, there were 3 that were anti-fluoridation, 3 that were pro-fluoridation, and 6 who hadn't come out one way or the other. Next. There was the exposure analysis in Chapter 2. And in this exposure analysis, they concluded that there were subsets of the population drinking fluoridated water, optimally the 1 part per million, that were exceeding the EPA's reference dose. Now, I underline that because both the ADA and CDC said that this was not relevant to water fluoridation. Look at it. They're saying there are subsets of the population that are exceeding the safe reference dose drinking fluoridated water. Now, these people obviously can't read the ADA and the CDC, treated and treated D. Next. These subsets included high water drinkers and bottle-fed babies. Next. The harmful effects of fluoride include dental fluorosis, bone damage, lowered thyroid function, accumulation of the pineal gland, brain damage, osteosarcoma, mixed evidence on that, and the fact is that some people are very sensitive to fluoride, which is exactly what you would expect, by the way, for any toxic substance. There's a normal distribution. You expect most people to have an average response, a few people to be very super resistant to the toxic, and some people to be very, very sensitive to the toxics. That's what you expect. Now, I want to stress this. There's a difference between saying that fluoride harms health. Next, there is no question that fluoride harms health. Millions of people in India and China have had their health wrecked by fluoride, crippled by fluoride. There's no argument about that. We've known that since the 1940s. What is the argument about that? Next, the argument is whether fluoridation causes harmful effects. And what that comes down to is the scientific question, is there an adequate margin of safety between the doses that cause harm, which have been documented in hundreds of studies, and the doses that we are likely to get in a fluoridated community, bearing in mind you can't control the dose, and also is that margin of safety sufficient to protect everyone? Not just the range of doses that people get, but the range of sensitivity. And we have a standard factor in toxicological risk assessment to protect the whole population once you've found harm. Once you've found harm, you take the dose that causes harm and divide by 10. And then you're confident that you've got a level which is safe for everybody in your population. If you divide by 10 the doses that are reported to cause harm in the National Research Council report, I can tell you categorically there is no adequate margin of safety to protect everyone drinking fluoridated water and, of course, getting more fluoride from other sources. Next. One of the conclusions, NRC, it is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with functions of the brain. Next. The NRC review only looked at 5 IQ studies, and they drew that conclusion from both these IQ studies and animal studies. The most important study, in my view, at that time was one by Zhang, and I'm very familiar with this study because Zhang invited me. He works for the CDC in China. He invited me to go to China and look at these villages for myself. There are 2 villages. One in the well water had less than 0.7 parts per million, and the other village had between 2.5 and 4.5 parts per million. Next. He controlled for lead exposure and iodine, which both could conflict with this finding. No difference. And he found a drop of 5 to 10 IQ points across the whole age range. Next. And the drop in IQ correlated with fluoride levels in the urine. Now, this recent meta-analysis didn't go into factors like this. Their study is the crudest of the studies that you can think of. It's comparing one community with one fluoride level with another community at another fluoride level. And the reason that those are the crudest of epidemiological studies is you don't have a measure of individual exposure. But Zhang has a measure of individual exposure. He had the measure of fluoride in the urine. And that correlates with the lowered IQ and greatly strengthens his study. Next. The whole IQ curve was shifted for both males and females. Here's the males. The blue line is the high fluoride village, the dotted mauve line is the low fluoride village. Next. Now, Zhang estimated that the threshold for lowering IQ was at 1.9 parts per million. He took all his data, extrapolated. Now, next, think about it. An American child drinking 2 liters of water at 1 part per million is going to get a dose of 2 milligrams per day. 1 part per million is 1 milligram per liter. So if you drink 2 liters, you're going to get 2 milligrams. One of those Chinese children drinking 1 liter of water at 1.9 parts per million is going to get 1.9 milligrams per day. In other words, there would be an overlap between the dose which was found to cause harm in this Chinese village and the doses that some children are going to have in America. That fact alone should stop fluoridation. Next, but it's worse than that. There are now, as of September of this year, 33 published studies or translated studies. The Fluoride Action Network has been translating many of these Chinese studies, which is exactly what Choi and Granjin did at Harvard. They too were translating these Chinese studies that nobody had ever seen in the Western world. Next, and the Harvard meta-analysis, Choi, in other words, they looked at 27 of these studies, high versus low fluoride villages. Next, the study was published in Environmental Health Perspectives. That is one of the leading environmental health journals in the world. It is published by the National Institute of Environmental Health Studies. So that takes another argument away from them, because they always say our studies are published in junk journals. 26 of the 27 studies found a lower average IQ in the high versus the low village. That's an incredible consistency, 26 out of 27. In 9 of the studies, the so-called high fluoride village had levels of fluoride less than 3 parts per million. Now, just to remind you, the spin put out by these public relations people that are running the corridors of your council here, your commissioners, these spin artists, put out the fact, oh, these were very high dosage, 11.5 parts per million. Well, I believe that one village, highest level was 11.5, but the average was nowhere near 11.5, and as you can see, 9 of these villages were lower than 3 parts per million. Again, there's no margin of safety here. Next. In 19 of the 27 studies, the difference in IQ was statistically significant. Next. And overall, the whole study found a lowering of 0.45 of standard deviation, which translates to 7 IQ points. Now, again, the spin artists were putting around that this was just a drop of half an IQ point, when in actual fact it was 14 times higher. The average was 7 IQ points drop. Next, and it was significant. The Harvard scientists concluded that further investigation of fluoride's lowering of IQ should be a high research priority. That's what the NRC concluded in 2006. So how many studies then were done on IQ in America since 2006? None. How many were done in Australia, New Zealand, England, Ireland, Israel, all these other fluoridated countries? Answer, 0. So how many do you think are going to be carried out in the next 6 years? You bet.